I should let Matt Brooks do the calling out of questions here, but you're standing. Here comes the microphone, whether you want it or not.
I appreciated all your comments, and I think we all can agree on just about everything you said. I just wanted to ask you one question, and I apologize for this, but I'm a urologist and I'm a physician, and it's relating to health care. We studied the Affordable Health Care Bill, and it's got many, many problems, and most people would agree that it would be best eliminated and unfunded. And I just wanted you to contrast that, please, to Massachusetts and the health care system that developed in Massachusetts when you were governor. And how would you make sure that whatever happens to reform health care would be different than Massachusetts?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Good question. And that is the first time I've been asked that question, so I appreciate the chance to address it. A couple things. First of all, you all have universal health care, if you will, socialized medicine in your states. And I say that a bit facetiously. But if somebody in your state who doesn't have insurance has a terrible automobile accident or a heart attack or cancer develops, as you know, we don't let them die on the street. They go to the hospital and are treated. And guess who pays for them? You, government. You all are paying for it. And we found that was happening in our state. Actually, we found a number of people who, even though their employer offered them health insurance, if they had to pick up 25% or 35% of the premiums, they said, no, I'm going to turn it down. We'd ask them, why are you turning down coverage when you're only paying 25 or 30% of the premium? They said, because I can get health care free just by showing up at the emergency room. And we said, you know what? This free rider problem is a real concern. And so we're going to insist on personal responsibility. We're going to say that people that have the ability to pay should pay for themselves. And that concept led to us coming up with an experiment, if you will. Now, that experiment hasn't worked perfectly. Some things worked well, some things didn't work well. But it's consistent with a constitutional approach in this country, which is we allow states to preserve powers not specifically granted to the federal government. And so we as a state took on a state problem, Republicans and Democrats working together, came up with something and tried it. And interestingly, I would never impose something that we did for our state and all the other states. I would never do what President Obama did, which is usurp the power of states and replace it with an overreaching federal government hand. That's the wrong way. And if I were lucky enough to be president, the thing I would do on day one is grant a waiver to all 50 states from Obamacare and then go to work to get it repealed. I could go on, but I'm told to stop when they applaud. Yeah, please. Thank you.
Recently, Donald Trump has begun a very brassy attack against President Obama. When you were our governor in Massachusetts, I was one of your citizens.
Thank you.
When you ran against Shannon O'Brien, you ran what I'm going to call a gentlemanly type of campaign, as we recently saw in our recent governor race was also kind of gentlemanly, and that gentleman lost, the Republican lost. If you have the opportunity to be the candidate, are you willing to take on more of what I'm going to call a pit bull attack type of approach to running?
Well, there's no question but that in my view, that when you run, when you disagree with someone on their policies, as much as I disagree with Barack Obama on his domestic policies, which have cost us jobs and have meant that men and women who could be working are not working, it's causing the breakup of families, it causes people to lose faith, it causes kids not to be able to go to college. I will take him on head-on and aggressively if I'm a nominee and a candidate. And by the way, if we get the chance to talk about health care, which would be fun, because of course he does me the great favor of saying that I was the inspiration for his plan, I'll say, if that's the case, why didn't you call me? Why didn't you ask what was wrong? Why didn't you ask if this was an experiment, what worked and what didn't? And I'd have told him, and I know what you're doing, Mr. President, is going to bankrupt us. We can't spend more money, even if Obamacare were perfect, and it's not. We can't spend more money at the federal government level. Yeah, I can't wait to have those conversations if we, and I'll take it to them. Now, on the other hand, I'm not going to go after people on innuendo and personal attacks. I'm going to go after people I disagree with on policy, because I want to make sure that the difference between us is as clear as day and night on every single issue where there is difference, and that people don't get confused by things that may or may not be relevant to independent voters, to women voters, to Hispanic voters. My goodness, we have got to talk about opportunity and freedom. We have to be able to draw in the huge number of people who come here as immigrants or are descendants of immigrants recently into our party, because ours is the party of opportunity, and theirs is the party of handout. And the handouts are not why they came here. They came here for opportunity for them and their kids. We'll battle good and hard. Thank you. You can make the call here. Young lady right here, almost in front of you here.
Thank you, Mr. Romney, and thank you for capturing the spirit of what I think we all believe and what we all know, and hopefully we'll see you in the White House soon. In a couple of months, the quantitative easing that we've been living under is going to go away. The strength of the dollar looks like it's falling, and it's at risk for losing its reserve currency. And in that case, oil may no longer be priced in dollars, which could be another problem for us. When you start your campaign, and as you enter the White House in the next months, how will you deal with that? What would be your response to that and your approach to it? And what can we start doing today to start to prepare for that?
You know, you heard yesterday, I believe it was yesterday, a presentation from Ambassador Sam Fox, where he described the national balance sheet. By the way, I find it interesting, coming from the private sector, that we have a government that publishes an income statement every year, but doesn't publish a balance sheet. I mean, if in the business world, if someone said to you, look, here's the income statement for my company, how much are you going to pay for it? You'd say, well, I can't possibly tell you the answer to that without seeing your balance sheet. But we have a national balance sheet, and as Sam described it yesterday, it's a pretty frightening thing. And so people thinking about investing in America, and one way they invest in America is by buying dollars, investing in our businesses, building facilities here, employing Americans here and around the world. People make these investments all around the world. And if they think our balance sheet is so sick that the investment is going to be overrun by massive inflation or an economic collapse of some kind, then they won't invest. And if they don't invest, we can't hire more people and get people in good jobs paying high incomes. And so what we have to do urgently in this country is deal with the fact that our balance sheet keeps getting worse and worse every year by greater and greater deficit spending. If you look at what's happening, our spending is going like that. Our revenues are not growing at the same rate. And if you look at where the spending is, let's just talk about where we spend our money. Right now, Washington is embroiled in a lot of discussion about the discretionary spending, non-military discretionary spending that makes up a little less than 20% of the budget. And that's an important topic. We're doing a lot of things there we like to do but simply can't afford to do anymore, and we've got to stop it. Then there's another 20% of the budget, which is the military. And let me tell you, there's a lot of waste in the military. There's no question about that. And we've got to cut out the waste. But I'm not going to cut out the waste to pay benefits. I'm going to cut out the waste to make sure that we are able to have a Navy which can fulfill its missions in the world, and an Air Force that can protect us, and enough soldiers on the ground to care for our interests and to assure people around the world that America is strong. Look, I recognize that we're a peaceful nation, but there is no greater ally of peace than a strong America. And so we're down to about, well, let's see, we had 600 ships following the Second World War. We're now, the Navy said that we needed to have 313 to carry out our mission. We're now down to under 290 ships, and we're on the way down to about 215 or 220. That's unacceptable. And so we're going to have to continue to invest in our military. So the military I'd keep at about 4% of GDP. And then there's the 60% left. So I said 20% non-military discretionary, 20% military, then 60% is entitlements and interest. That's where the money is. And if we're going to finally get the trajectory of our spending down such that people in the world can recognize that we've solved our problem, that our balance sheet will be cleaned up, they'll continue to invest in dollars, continue to invest in jobs. To do that, we're going to have to take on the reform of our entitlement programs, not changing an iota for current retirees, for seniors, or for people in their 60s, But going to people in their 20s and 30s and 40s and some in their 50s and saying, we have to tell you the truth about changes to these programs to make sure they are sustainable and we can honor these promises without killing the country. And that is something I think we will talk about in 2012. I'm glad that the Washington Post raised what they would, their criticism of the president for not taking on Social Security. We have got to do that. We have to tell the American people the truth. And I know that when I wrote my book 2 years ago and put a chapter in there called The Worst Generation, and laid out in there the fact that my generation, the baby boomers, keep on voting bigger and bigger benefits for ourselves, hoping the next generation will pay for it while we're 6 feet under. That can't go on. And I'm absolutely convinced that the American people understand that. But I know that there are people who are convinced instead that even raising the topic of entitlement reforms and making them sustainable is touching the third rail of American politics. I'm told, Mitt, you can't possibly write or talk about those things and ever think about winning an election. And if that's the case, so be it. We have to tell the American people the truth, and the American people are patriotic enough to do something about it. And, who we got who hasn't spoken yet? You guys can make the choice. You've got a bunch of hands all over the room. Those are the microphones. Do your work. You pick someone and give them a microphone. Hi, Ken.
Hi, Ken Abramowitz. Great job today. I agreed with most everything you said, but I just, as you know, there's a movement afoot for the Palestinian Authority to declare a unilateral state in violation of the Oslo Accords, with a vote coming up in the fall in the UN, supported by most of the countries, particularly terror-supporting countries. And the big question is, what will America do? If President Obama votes with the UN in favor of a unilateral Palestinian state, and if you should decide to run for president, when you become president, would you reverse that decision of American recognition of a unilaterally declared Palestinian state?
Well, there are a lot of hypotheticals in there, but let's just say this: it would be reprehensible and wrong for the United States of America ever to accede to a request by the Palestinian Authority to declare an independent state. The Palestinians and Israelis are going to have to negotiate this amongst themselves. Yeah. Yes, sir. And I think we ought to make this the last question so that you guys can get some food. I hate standing between an audience and lunch.
What are your views about reform of the tax code? And if you are in favor of it, could you tell us in what ways? And would you make it revenue neutral, or would you use it as an opportunity to cut down the deficit?
Yeah, what I would like to do with spending and taxes would be to have a cap on federal spending as a percentage of our economy or of our GDP. Historically, the number's been about, the government spent about 18.8% of GDP, and our taxes have been roughly that level. I'd say take 18.8% or 19% or whatever number we agree upon, but take a number and say the federal government is not going to spend more than that level. That's number one. Now, how we get to tax folks? I'm not looking for ways to have the highest income people pay a smaller share of taxes. I know there's some people who would like to do that, but I would like to find ways to simplify the tax code and make it more fair. How would you do that? Well, there are some who advocate, for instance, the fair tax, which is a national sales tax to replace the income tax. That has some really powerful, positive growth features. As it's currently, you like it, right? As it's currently envisioned, it has, in my opinion, a byproduct that may not be ideal, which is it lowers taxes pretty dramatically for the top 1/2 of 1% and raises the tax share by the middle income folks. So that, I think, would have to be addressed in order to make that work. I think it's going to be a long time before Washington would embrace a consumption-based tax. And so I think the right first step that we have the most likelihood of being successful in achieving would be something akin to what the Deficit Reduction Commission described, which is a dramatic reduction in the rates of both corporate and individual taxes. I think that makes sense. They achieve the same revenue outcome by basically eliminating some of the special breaks and deductions and exemptions that are in our current tax code. I think that has merit. Look, we can't attract the investments of moms and dads and families and pension funds and wealthy people. We can't attract those investments all around the world into this country to build enterprises if we have the highest tax rate in the world. And among developed nations, America is soon to have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. That will not create jobs. I'm not looking for ways to get rich people richer. Sorry, Sheldon. I'm not. I want to do my very best to help the people of America find good jobs and have good incomes and keep government from getting too big. And if we put a ceiling and say you can't spend more than 18.8% of the GDP, that, in my opinion, is one way to do that. And we can keep looking for ways to get our tax rates down so we can be competitive globally. There's some taxes that make no sense in our tax code. I don't know how familiar you are with something called the repatriation tax. This is an unusual tax. If let's say Microsoft makes $5 billion selling software to the Chinese, they got this big profit, $5 billion they got over there in China in their bank account. If they leave it there, they don't pay U.S. taxes. They just pay Chinese taxes. But if they bring it home, we'll charge them the difference between tax rates up to 35% more in taxes. And does that make any sense? To say to people, if you leave your money outside the country, we won't tax you. But if you bring it home, we're going to tax you heavily. By some reports, there's as much as $1 trillion in corporate profit sitting outside the United States, much of which would like to come back here. And I'm criticized for even raising that, saying, well, they won't all spend that money for investment. They might give some of it to the shareholders. Yeah. And the answer is, yeah. And the shareholders will buy things and invest in America and create jobs. It's amazing. I spent some time in government, as you know, only 4 years. My life has been in the private sector. I spent 25 years in, yeah, Sam, thank you. I spent 25 years in the private sector. I spent 4 years serving my state as governor. I've not been in politics so long that I inhaled. I'm still a business guy. And I would occasionally exchange thoughts with others in the legislature, most of whom, these individuals, had never worked in the private sector, or many of whom hadn't. I remember one conversation I had about our prison system in Massachusetts. And I looked to see whether we could bring in a for-profit prison company to manage our jails at lower cost than we were managing them. And the people I was speaking with said, but Governor, they'll be more expensive than we are. And I thought, why would you think that? And they said, well, because they have to earn a profit and we don't. And I said, I don't think you understand how the free enterprise system works. The whole idea of America is that profit creates incentives for people to do things in better and better ways at lower and lower cost. That's the whole idea. That's why we've outperformed every other place in the world. That's why China's copying us. And India, everywhere else in the world is saying, yeah, that incentive works. So many people in government just don't understand how America works. And one thing we have to make sure that we do is not so burden the entrepreneurial, innovative, creative spirit of Americans with government just lapping over them with more and more regulation and bureaucracy and red tape and taxation that we kill what has made America, America. And this is a great and patriotic room. And I'm not just talking about your walls here, Sheldon and Miriam. I'm talking about the people that are in this wonderful group. The RJC has had a huge impact. It continues to have a huge impact. It will have a huge impact. I appreciate the chance to address you today. We've got great leaders in this room, and I'm convinced that with your leadership, we'll get America on the right track once again. Thanks so much.